Winter of 1402 descended upon the kingdom of Valdoria with a silence that seemed to hold the world in suspension. Snow fell in gentle curtains across the village of Ashford, settling upon thatched roofs and cobblestone streets, transforming the humble settlement into something that resembled a scene from an illuminated manuscript. The cold was bitter, seeping through every crack and crevice, but inside the small cottage at the edge of the village, warmth radiated from a hearth where herbs hung drying and a pot of healing broth simmered over the flames. Amara Ose knelt beside a straw pallet, where a child of perhaps 6 years lay shivering beneath a wool blanket. The girl's face was flushed with fever, her small body racked by the coughing sickness that had swept through Ashford in recent weeks. Her mother stood nearby, wringing her hands, eyes red from weeping and sleeplessness. "Please," the woman whispered. "The physician said there was nothing more to be done. He said to prepare her burial shroud. But they told me you could help. They said you saved the miller's son when everyone thought him lost." Amara placed her hand gently on the child's forehead, feeling the dangerous heat that burned beneath the skin. She was 26 years old, with skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes that held depths of amber and gold, warm as the firelight that illuminated her features. Her hair was arranged in intricate braids close to her scalp, a style her mother had taught her in the distant land of her birth before illness and circumstance had carried Amara across an ocean to this cold northern kingdom. "What is her name?" Amara asked, her voice soft but steady. "Elena. Her name is Elena." Amara nodded and reached for the leather satchel that never left her side. Inside were pouches of dried herbs, small vials of tinctures, and implements for preparing medicines. The tools of a craft passed down through generations of women in her family, knowledge that had traveled with her from the shores of her homeland to this place where such wisdom was rare and often misunderstood. "I will need quiet," she said, "and fresh water from the well. Cold, not heated. Can you bring that?" The mother nodded frantically and rushed to comply, grateful for something to do, some action to take against the helplessness that had consumed her for days. Alone with the child, Amara worked with practiced efficiency. She prepared a tea of elderflower and willow bark to bring down the fever, then created a poultice of mustard seed and honey to place upon the small chest, drawing out the congestion that made each breath a struggle. She hummed as she worked, an old song her grandmother had sung, a melody that carried healing in its very notes, or so her mother had always claimed. The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. "Are you an angel?" she whispered. Amara smiled gently. "No, little one, just a woman who knows something of healing. Now drink this. It will taste bitter, but it will help you breathe." She supported the child's head and helped her sip the tea, watching as some of the tension eased from the small body. The mother returned with the water, and Amara used it to dampen cloths that she placed on Elena's wrists and forehead, cooling the overheated blood. "She must drink this tea every 4 hours," Amara instructed. "Keep the poultice warm and replace it twice daily. Open the window for a few minutes each morning. I know it seems wrong in this cold, but fresh air will help clear her lungs. And most importantly, do not let the physician bleed her. Her body needs its strength." "Will she live?" The mother's voice trembled with desperate hope. Amara hesitated. She had learned long ago not to make promises that the universe might not keep. "She is strong, and we have caught this early enough. If the fever breaks by tomorrow evening, she will recover. But you must follow my instructions exactly." She gathered her things and refused the coins the woman tried to press into her hand. "Pay me when she is well," Amara said. "That is payment enough." The walk back to her own cottage took her through the heart of Ashford, past the smithy where Thomas the blacksmith raised a hand in greeting, past the baker's shop where the scent of fresh bread mingled with the cold air, past the well where women gathered to draw water and exchange gossip. Some nodded to her as she passed, gratitude evident in their eyes. She had treated their children, their parents, their livestock. Others looked away, crossing themselves, muttering words she pretended not to hear. Witch, sorceress, devil's handmaiden. Amara had grown accustomed to these whispers in the 8 years since she had arrived in Valdoria. She understood their source, even if she could not forgive their cruelty. She was different, visibly, undeniably different, in a land where everyone shared the same pale complexion, the same brown or blonde hair, the same suspicion of anything foreign. Her skin marked her as other, and her knowledge of healing, knowledge that seemed miraculous to those unfamiliar with the medicinal properties of plants, marked her as dangerous. She had survived by being useful, by curing what the physicians could not cure, by never charging more than her patients could afford, by keeping her head down and her voice soft and her ambitions modest. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was a life, and in a world that had taken so much from her, that was not nothing. Her cottage stood at the village's edge, where the cultivated fields gave way to the dark expanse of Ashford Forest. It was small but sturdy, with a garden where she grew herbs even in winter, sheltered beneath oiled cloth that trapped what little warmth the pale sun provided. Inside, shelves lined every wall, crowded with jars and bottles and bundles of drying plants. A cat of indeterminate age and undeniable attitude lounged before the fire, deigning to open one eye as Amara entered before returning to sleep. "Helpful as always, Ptolemy," she murmured, hanging her cloak on its hook and moving to check the various preparations that required her attention. She was grinding dried chamomile when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the small space with unexpected authority. Ptolemy raised his head, ears flattening, and Amara felt a prickle of unease trace down her spine. She knew the knocks of her regular patients, knew the tentative taps of those who came to her in secret, ashamed to be seen seeking help from the foreign healer. This knock was different. This knock expected to be answered. She opened the door to find a man in livery she did not recognize, deep blue velvet trimmed with silver thread, bearing an emblem of a crowned lion surrounded by roses. He was young, perhaps 20, with the carefully neutral expression of a well-trained servant. "Amara Osei?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I am she." He produced a letter from within his cloak and extended it with a slight bow. The parchment was heavy, cream-colored, sealed with blue wax that bore the same crowned lion emblem as his livery. "You are summoned to Thornbury Castle," he said, "3 days hence, at the hour of 3 in the afternoon. The Duchess of Thornbury is hosting a tea in honor of Her Majesty Queen Eleonora, and your presence has been requested." Amara stared at the letter in her hands, her mind struggling to process words that seemed to belong to some other reality, some other life. The Duchess of Thornbury, Queen Eleonora, tea, her. "There must be some mistake," she heard herself say. "There is no mistake." The servant's voice remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, warning, perhaps, or pity. "Her Grace has heard of your reputation as a healer and wishes to present you to the Queen. You will arrive at the castle gates no later than 2:30. Formal attire is required." Before Amara could respond, he turned and strode back toward a black carriage that waited in the narrow lane, its horses stamping impatiently against the cold. She watched until it disappeared around a bend in the road, then looked down at the letter still clutched in her hands. The Duchess of Thornbury. Even in Ashford, far from the intrigues of court, that name was known. Lady Margaret Ashworth, Duchess of Thornbury, was said to be the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, and the most dangerous. Her husband, the Duke, was a weak man who preferred his hunting dogs to matters of state, leaving his wife to accumulate power and influence that rivaled the Queen herself. Stories of her cruelty circulated like dark currency, servants dismissed without references for imagined slights, merchants ruined for failing to show proper deference, young noblewomen whose reputations she had destroyed for the crime of attracting attention that should have been hers. And now this woman had summoned Amara to tea with the Queen. It was, Amara understood with cold clarity, almost certainly a trap. She returned inside, closing the door against the winter chill, and sank into the chair beside her work table. Ptolemy jumped into her lap, an unusual gesture of solidarity, and she stroked his fur absently while her mind raced through possibilities. She could refuse, claim illness or an urgent case that required her attention. But refusing a summons from the Duchess was dangerous in its own right, an insult that would not be forgotten or forgiven. And more than that, more than the practical calculation of risk and reward, something in Amara rebelled against the idea of fleeing from this threat. She thought of her mother, who had faced 100 indignities with her spine straight and her dignity intact. She thought of her grandmother, who had been a healer of such renown that even the chief of their village had sought her counsel. She thought of all the women who had come before her, who had survived and persevered and refused to be diminished by the cruelty of others. Whatever awaited her at Thornbury Castle, she would face it as they would have faced it. She would go. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one, tales of courage, dignity, and love found in unexpected places, are shared here every week. Subscribe now so you never miss a moment. The following morning brought a change in the weather. The snow had ceased during the night, and a pale winter sun emerged from behind the clouds, setting the white blanketed landscape glittering like scattered diamonds. Amara rose early to check on her patients in the village, stopping first at the cottage where little Elena lay. The child was sitting up when Amara arrived, sipping broth and complaining about the taste of the healing tea. Her fever had broken just after midnight, her mother reported through tears of relief, and she had slept peacefully for the first time in days. "You saved her," the woman said, pressing Amara's hands between her own. "You saved my daughter. I don't care what anyone says about you. You're an angel sent from heaven." Amara smiled gently, but made no response to this. She knew better than to accept such praise too readily. Today's angel could become tomorrow's witch with frightening ease, depending on which way the winds of opinion blew. She was walking back through the village, her mind occupied with thoughts of the summons that awaited her, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her step to the side of the road. A group of riders was descending the main thoroughfare, 5 men on horseback, their mounts' breath steaming in the cold air, their cloaks bearing an emblem she did not recognize. A black hawk on a field of gold. The lead rider drew her attention immediately. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of one born to the saddle, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark skin nearly as deep as her own, and close-cropped hair that showed hints of gray at the temples. His face was strong-featured, handsome in a way that spoke of character rather than mere accident of birth, and his eyes, dark, intelligent, watchful, scanned the village with an expression of keen interest. Those eyes found her standing at the roadside, and for a moment that seemed to stretch beyond its natural duration, their gazes held. Amara felt something shift in her chest, a flutter, a warmth, a recognition of something she could not name. Then the moment passed, the rider looked away, and the group continued on toward the manor house that stood on the hill overlooking Ashford. "That's Lord Marcus Ashworth," said a voice at her elbow. Amara turned to find old Bess, the village's unofficial keeper of gossip, standing beside her with a knowing gleam in her eye. Bess was 70 if she was a day, with a face like a wizened apple and a mind sharp as a freshly honed blade. "Ashworth?" Amara repeated. "Related to the Duchess of Thornbury?" "Her younger brother, though you'd never know it to look at them." Bess cackled softly. "He's the new Lord of Ashford. Inherited the estate when his uncle died last autumn. Been living abroad for 20 years, they say, in kingdoms far to the south. Came back changed, according to the servants at the manor. More thoughtful, more—" She paused, searching for the word. "More human, I suppose. Not like that snake of a sister." Amara absorbed this information, filing it away for later consideration. Why would a nobleman spend 20 years in distant kingdoms? Third son, wasn't he? No inheritance to speak of. Went off to make his fortune in trade. Bess lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Some say he married a foreign princess and she died tragically. Others say he was running from a scandal. The truth?" She shrugged her thin shoulders. "Who knows? But he's back now, and he's the lord of this manor, and we'd all best get used to having an Ashworth looking over our shoulders again." The old woman shuffled off to spread her news elsewhere, leaving Amara standing in the muddy street with more questions than she'd had before. The Duchess of Thornbury's brother, installed as lord of the very village where Amara had built her life. It was too much coincidence to be coincidence. She returned to her cottage with her mind churning, but the day's work would not wait. There were medicines to prepare, patients to see, knowledge to pass on to the village midwife who had been learning the use of certain herbs for easing childbirth. It was late afternoon before Amara had a moment to sit and think properly about what she had learned. The knock at her door, when it came, was different from the messenger's sharp authority of the day before. This was a measured knock, patient, as if the person on the other side had all the time in the world and expected the door to be answered when it was convenient. Amara opened it to find Lord Marcus Ashworth standing on her threshold. Up close, he was even more striking than he had appeared on horseback. He wore simple clothing, a doublet of dark wool, well made but unadorned, and his expression was one of genuine curiosity rather than the barely concealed contempt she had grown accustomed to seeing on noble faces. "Miss Osei?" he asked. His voice was deep and warm, carrying traces of an accent she couldn't quite place. "My lord." She dropped into a curtsy, her heart beating faster than she would have liked. "How may I serve you?" "By answering some questions, if you are willing." He glanced past her into the cottage, taking in the shelves of herbs and medicines, the cat lounging by the fire, the organized chaos of a working healer's space. "May I come in? I promise not to take much of your time." Every instinct warned her to refuse. Alone with a nobleman in her cottage, it was improper at best, dangerous at worst. But something in his eyes held her, something that seemed more like genuine interest than ulterior motive. "Of course, my lord." She stepped aside to let him enter, watching as he moved through the small space with careful respect, examining the contents of her shelves without touching, his dark eyes taking in everything. "Elderflower," he murmured, pausing before a row of jars. "Willow bark, yarrow, feverfew." He turned to face her, something like surprise in his expression. "You know the southern remedies." "My lord?" "I spent 15 years in the kingdom south of the Great Desert," he said. "I learned much of their healing arts, the use of willow bark for pain and fever, the properties of certain mushrooms for wounds, knowledge that is almost unknown in this part of the world." He gestured toward her shelves. "And yet here it is, in a cottage in Ashford being practiced by a woman who was born—" He paused, his eyes searching her face. "Where? The western coast? Near the great river?" Amara felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. In 8 years, no one had ever correctly guessed her origins. No one had ever shown any interest in learning them. "The eastern forests," she said quietly. "Near where the great river meets its largest tributary. A place called Igboland by my people." He nodded slowly, and there was something like recognition in his gaze. "I traveled near there once. Beautiful country. The healers there are renowned throughout the region." "You know of my homeland?" "I know of many homelands." He moved to stand beside her work table, his presence somehow filling the small cottage without overwhelming it. "I know how valuable such knowledge is, and how little it is understood here in Valdoria. I also know how dangerous it can be to possess knowledge that others fear." The air between them seemed to thicken. Amara understood suddenly that this was not a casual visit. He had come with purpose. "My lord speaks as if from experience. I speak as someone who has learned that the world is far larger and more complex than the nobles of this kingdom imagine." He met her eyes directly. "I also speak as someone who has recently learned that his sister, the Duchess of Thornbury, has summoned you to tea with the Queen." Amara's blood ran cold. "How do you know this?" "The Duchess and I are not close, but we have mutual acquaintances who keep me informed of her activities." His expression darkened. "My sister is many things, Miss Osei, but kind is not among them. If she has invited you to Thornbury Castle, it is not to honor your abilities. It is to make an example of you. I had surmised as much. And yet you intend to go." It was not a question, but Amara answered it anyway. "I have little choice, my lord. To refuse would be to give her power over me through fear. Whatever she has planned, I would rather face it openly than spend my life waiting for the blow to fall." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" I don't know. Perhaps someone more afraid? Perhaps someone more eager to flee? He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I came here to warn you, Miss Osi, but I find myself wondering if perhaps warning is not what you need. What do I need, my lord? He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. An ally, he said finally. Someone who knows my sister's methods. Someone who can help you navigate the dangers of that tea without falling into whatever trap she has laid. He paused again. Someone who has his own reasons for wishing to see the Duchess's schemes fail. Amara studied him, searching for signs of deception, for hidden motives, for any indication that this was simply another trap wearing a different mask. But all she found was sincerity, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Why would you help me? She asked. I am a foreigner, a commoner, a woman who practices a craft that your church calls witchcraft. What possible reason could you have for risking your sister's wrath on my behalf? Lord Marcus smiled then, a small smile tinged with sadness, but genuine. Because I spent 20 years learning that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their birth or their homeland or the color of their skin. Because I returned to this kingdom hoping to find someone who understood that truth. And because... He hesitated, then continued. Because my mother was a healer too, Miss Ose. A wise woman from a village not unlike this one. The Duchess destroyed her reputation out of spite when we were children. She died in disgrace, accused of the very thing you have been accused of, and I have never forgiven my sister for it. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Amara felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of armor she had not realized she was wearing, a crack in the careful walls she had built around her heart. I am sorry for your mother, she said softly, as am I, every day. He straightened, as if shaking off the weight of old grief. Will you accept my help, Miss Osi? Will you allow me to accompany you to Thornbury Castle and stand beside you when my sister shows her hand? The offer was extraordinary, unprecedented. A nobleman of his rank, publicly aligning himself with a woman like her, against his own sister. The scandal alone could ruin him. Why? She asked again, but this time the question held a different weight. He held her gaze, and in his dark eyes she saw something that made her heart quicken in a way she had not felt in years. Because some things are worth the risk, he said simply. Amara drew a breath and made her choice. Then I accept, my lord, and I thank you. The 3 days before the tea passed in a blur of preparation. Lord Marcus sent his personal seamstress to Amara's cottage with instructions to create a gown suitable for a royal audience. And when Amara protested that she could not accept such a gift, he responded with a letter that managed to be both formal and wry. Consider it protective armor, Miss Osi. One does not enter battle without proper equipment. The gown that arrived on the morning of the appointed day was a masterwork of understated elegance. Deep blue velvet, the color of a winter twilight, with silver embroidery along the neckline and sleeves that echoed, Amara realized with a start, traditional patterns from her homeland. The seamstress, when questioned, admitted that Lord Marcus had provided sketches, drawings he had made during his years of travel, of patterns he had seen on the garments of healers in distant lands. The gesture touched her more deeply than she could express. For someone to have seen her culture not as something strange or threatening, but as something beautiful, worth preserving, worth honoring, it was a gift greater than any gown. She dressed with care, her hands steady despite the nerves that fluttered in her stomach. She arranged her hair in the style her mother had worn, elaborate braids that swept back from her face and gathered at the crown of her head. Around her neck she placed the single piece of jewelry she owned, a small pendant containing herbs and a stone from the riverbed of her homeland, a talisman her grandmother had pressed into her mother's palm generations ago. The carriage arrived precisely at noon. Not the Duchess's black vehicle, but one bearing the golden hawk of House Ashworth, Lord Marcus's personal emblem. The man himself handed her inside, his fingers warm against hers, his dark eyes holding an emotion she could not quite name. You look He paused, seeming to search for the right word. Remarkable. I look terrified, she admitted. You look like a queen, he corrected gently. And that, I suspect, is precisely what my sister will not expect. The journey to Thornbury Castle took 4 hours along roads that wound through snow-covered hills and frozen forests. They traveled mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the quiet of two people who did not feel the need to fill every moment with words. Lord Marcus sat across from her, his presence solid and reassuring, and occasionally their eyes would meet, and something would pass between them, understanding, solidarity, something more. As the towers of Thornbury came into view, rising against a sky the color of hammered silver, Amara felt her heart begin to race. The castle was enormous, far grander than the manor house of Ashford, with walls of gray stone that seemed to absorb the pale winter light and windows that glittered like watchful eyes. Remember, Lord Marcus said quietly, whatever happens in there, you are not alone. I will be with you, and the Queen is not my sister's puppet, no matter what Marguerite believes. Eleonora is a just woman. Appeal to her justice, not her sympathy. And if justice is not enough? He leaned forward, his expression fierce with determination. Then we fight. Together. The carriage passed through the castle gates and drew to a halt before a grand entrance where liveried servants waited to receive them. Lord Marcus descended first and offered his hand to help Amara down, a gesture of courtesy that would not be lost on the watching servants, or on whoever reported the arrival to the Duchess. They were escorted through corridors of polished stone and gleaming tapestries, past suits of armor that stood sentinel, and paintings of ancestors who gazed down with the peculiar arrogance of the long-dead nobility. Finally, they arrived at a pair of ornately carved doors, and a servant announced them in a voice that echoed through the chamber beyond. Lord Marcus Ashworth, Baron of Ashford, and Miss Amara Osei, healer of Ashford Village. The room they entered was designed to intimidate. It was not large, but every surface gleamed with wealth. Silk wallpaper in pale rose, a carpet so thick that footsteps made no sound, furniture of dark wood polished to mirror brightness. A fire blazed in a marble hearth, and tall windows looked out over gardens where topiaries had been sculpted into fantastical shapes now laden with snow. 3 women waited within. The first was clearly the Queen. She sat in a chair of state near the hearth, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked auburn hair beneath a delicate crown, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her face was kind, but marked by the weight of years spent bearing heavy responsibility. She wore deep blue velvet trimmed with ermine, and her expression as she studied the new arrivals was one of sharp intelligence. The second was equally clearly the Duchess of Thornbury. Lady Marguerite Ashworth was as beautiful as the rumors claimed. Golden hair arranged in elaborate coils, flawless pale skin, features so perfectly symmetrical they might have been sculpted from marble. Her gown was cloth of gold, and jewels glittered at her throat and wrists and in her hair. But it was her eyes that held Amara's attention, pale blue, cold as winter ice, filled with a malice that the lovely face did nothing to disguise. The third woman was younger, perhaps 25, with brown hair and a pleasant, forgettable face. She sat slightly apart from the others, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. A lady-in-waiting, Amara guessed, a witness to whatever was about to unfold. "Brother," the Duchess said, and her voice was honey poured over broken glass. "What an unexpected pleasure. I don't recall inviting you to this gathering." "I invited myself," Lord Marcus replied calmly. "When I learned that you had summoned one of my tenants to meet the Queen, I felt it only proper to accompany her. Miss Osei is under my protection, Marguerite. I trust you will remember that." Something flickered in the Duchess's icy eyes. Anger, quickly suppressed. How touching. The Lord of Ashford championing his village healer. She turned her smile toward Amara, and it was the smile of a predator contemplating its prey. "Welcome, Miss Osei. We have heard such remarkable things about you." "Your Grace honors me," Amara replied, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Do come and sit. Tea is about to be served." The Duchess gestured toward a chair that had been placed slightly apart from the others, positioned so that its occupant would face the full scrutiny of everyone in the room. Her Majesty has been most eager to meet you. Amara moved toward the indicated seat, acutely aware of every eye upon her. Lord Marcus positioned himself near the window, close enough to intervene if necessary, his presence a silent statement of support. Miss Osei, the Queen spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. The Duchess tells me you possess remarkable healing abilities, that you have cured patients whom physicians had given up for lost. I have been fortunate in some of my treatments, Your Majesty, Amara replied carefully. I make no claims to miracle working, only to knowledge passed down through generations of women in my family. Knowledge from your homeland, the Duchess interjected, her tone sweetly poisonous. Such a distant, exotic place. We know so little about it here. Tell me, Miss Osei, in your homeland, do they worship the same God we worship here? Do they follow the same commandments? Or do they practice? She paused delicately. Other forms of devotion? The trap was being laid, each word a careful placement of snares. Amara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. My people believe in one Creator, Your Grace. We call him by a different name, but we honor the same principles of compassion, justice, and care for one another. How reassuring. The Duchess's smile widened. And your healing practices, are they also based on these principles of compassion? Or do they perhaps involve, another careful pause, other sources of power? My healing is based on knowledge of plants and their properties, Amara said, her voice firm despite the cold knot forming in her stomach. There is no sorcery in what I do, only observation, study, and care. And yet the results are so extraordinary. The Duchess rose from her chair and moved to stand before Amara, her golden gown catching the firelight. Fevers that break overnight, wounds that heal without scarring, children snatched from the very jaws of death. How does one explain such miracles without invoking powers beyond the natural? Your Grace, Lord Marcus began, but his sister cut him off with a raised hand. I am merely asking questions, brother. Surely there can be no harm in questions. She returned her attention to Amara, unless, of course, there is something to hide. The moment stretched, tension thrumming in the air like a plucked harp string. And then Queen Eleonora spoke. Marguerite. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable weight of royal authority. I believe that is quite enough. If this story has touched your heart, pause for a moment and leave a comment saying, the measure of a person is not in their birth, but in their courage. Let me know you understand what Amara is fighting for. The Duchess turned toward the Queen, surprise flickering across her perfect features, before she masked it with the expression of innocent confusion. Your Majesty, I was merely attempting to understand our guest better. Surely you share my curiosity about these remarkable abilities. What I share, Queen Eleonora interrupted, is an appreciation for honesty, something that appears to be in short supply in this room. She rose from her chair of state, her movement deliberate and commanding despite her slender frame. Did you think I would not see through this little performance, Marguerite? Did you truly believe me so easily manipulated? The Duchess's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I don't know what Your Majesty means. Then let me clarify. The Queen moved to stand before the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across her features. I have known you since you were a child, Marguerite. I watched you torment your nursemaids, destroy your sister's belongings, scheme against anyone who dared to outshine you. I have watched you grow into a woman whose beauty conceals a heart as cold as winter stone. And I have said nothing, because you are family, and because I hoped, foolishly it seems, that time might temper your cruelty. She turned to face the room, her gray eyes hard as steel. But I will not stand by while you attempt to destroy an innocent woman simply because her existence offends your vanity. Your Majesty. The Duchess's voice had lost some of its honeyed smoothness. This woman is a foreigner who practices arts that the Church condemns. I am merely protecting the kingdom from— You are protecting nothing but your own pride. The queen's words cut like a blade. Did you think I would not investigate before accepting your invitation? Did you think I would come here blind to your schemes? She gestured toward the lady-in-waiting who had sat silent throughout the exchange. Lady Catherine, please share what you reported to me last evening. The young woman rose, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. Your Majesty asked me to inquire about Miss Osei's reputation in Ashford and the surrounding villages. I spoke with the miller whose son Miss Osei saved from the sweating sickness. I spoke with the blacksmith whose wife she attended during a difficult childbirth. I spoke with the old widow who lives above the bakery, whose pain she eased in her final weeks. Without exception, they spoke of Miss Osei with gratitude and respect. Several— She paused, glancing at the Duchess with something like defiance. Several specifically asked me to warn Miss Osei that the Duchess meant her harm. The silence that followed was absolute. Queen Eleonora turned to Amara, and her expression softened into something approaching warmth. Miss Osei, I owe you an apology. I came here today knowing that my cousin intended to use this gathering to humiliate you, perhaps even to lay the groundwork for accusations of witchcraft. I allowed the invitation to proceed because I wished to see her methods exposed, and because I wished to meet you myself, to judge your character with my own eyes. Amara found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. And what is your Majesty's judgment? That you are a woman of remarkable courage and dignity, that your knowledge, whatever its source, has saved lives that would otherwise have been lost, and that the kingdom of Valdoria would be poorer without you in it. The Queen glanced at Lord Marcus, who stood by the window with an expression of barely contained triumph. Your lord has spoken highly of you, Miss Osei. I see now that his praise was not exaggerated. This is absurd, the Duchess hissed, all pretense of courtesy abandoned. She is a commoner, a foreigner, a black woman who has done more good for my subjects in 8 years than you have done in 35, the Queen interrupted coldly. The color of her skin does not diminish her worth, Marguerite. Only someone as consumed by hatred as you could believe otherwise. She turned back to Amara, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the full weight of royal decree. Miss Osei, I have a proposal for you. Lord Marcus has spoken to me of his desire to establish a school of healing arts on his estate, a place where knowledge like yours might be taught and preserved, protected from the superstition and persecution that currently threaten those who possess it. I wish to support this endeavor. I wish to grant it royal patronage, placing it beyond the reach of those who would see it destroyed. Amara felt the world tilt around her. A school, royal patronage, everything she had never dared to dream of, offered in a single breath. Your Majesty is too generous, she managed. I am being practical, the Queen corrected. This kingdom loses too many of its people to illnesses that could be prevented, injuries that could be healed. If there are those among us who possess knowledge that could save lives, then that knowledge should be cultivated, not crushed. She paused, her gaze moving between Amara and Lord Marcus with an expression that seemed almost knowing. I understand that the two of you have become acquainted during these past days. I trust that you will work together well. Before Amara could respond, the Duchess let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a snarl. This is a travesty. A queen patronizing the dark arts, endorsing the mingling of a nobleman with a common foreign. Marguerite, the Queen's voice was ice. You will be silent. I will not be silent. This woman has bewitched you all, my brother, your Majesty, everyone who comes near her. Can you not see— What I see, Lord Marcus spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, his voice low and dangerous, is my sister destroying herself through her own venom. What I see is a woman so consumed by hatred that she cannot recognize goodness, even when it stands directly before her. He crossed the room to stand beside Amara, and in the watching eyes of the Queen and the lady-in-waiting, and even the Duchess herself, he took her hand in his. "I have spent 20 years searching the world for meaning," he said, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "I have seen wonders and horrors, beauty and cruelty in every land I visited. And I returned to Valdoria believing that I would never find what I was looking for, that the capacity for true understanding had been bred out of my countrymen generations ago." His grip tightened on her fingers. "I was wrong. I found it in a cottage at the edge of Ashford Forest, in a woman whose courage and wisdom put every noble I have ever known to shame. And I will spend the rest of my life, if she permits me, proving myself worthy of her." Amara's heart was pounding so hard, she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. This was not how she had imagined this day unfolding. This was not anything she could have imagined. "My lord," she whispered, "you cannot mean—" "I mean every word." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in a gesture of courtly devotion that made the Duchess let out another strangled sound of outrage. "I know it is too soon. I know we have barely begun to know each other. But I also know what I feel, Amara, and I know that some truths do not require time to be understood." Queen Eleonora was watching them with an expression that had softened from approval into something warmer. "It seems," she said quietly, "that this tea has been far more eventful than any of us anticipated." She turned to face the Duchess, and all warmth vanished from her voice. "Marguerite Ashworth, Duchess of Thornbury, you have abused my trust and your position at court for the last time. You have attempted to use a royal gathering to persecute an innocent woman. You have revealed yourself to be motivated by nothing more than petty cruelty and vile prejudice." The Duchess had gone pale, her golden beauty suddenly fragile and diminished. "From this moment forward," the Queen continued, "you are banished from my court. You will retire to your husband's most distant estates and remain there until such time as I deem fit to summon you back, which I warn you may be never. You will make no further attempt to harm Miss Osi or anyone connected to her, and you will leave this room. Now." For a heartbeat, the Duchess seemed ready to argue, to fight, to unleash whatever remained of her venom. But she looked around at the assembled faces, her brother's quiet triumph, the Queen's implacable authority, Amara's steady dignity, and whatever defiance she might have summoned died before it could take root. She swept from the room without a word, her golden gown disappearing through the ornate doors like the last flicker of a dying flame. The remainder of the tea passed in an atmosphere so different from its beginning that it might have been an entirely different gathering. The Queen ordered fresh refreshments brought, and the four of them, Queen Eleonora, Lord Marcus, Lady Catherine, and Amara, sat together in conversation that ranged from the practical details of the proposed healing school to broader questions of medicine, governance, and the changes sweeping through the world beyond Valdoria's borders. Amara found herself speaking more freely than she had in years, sharing knowledge that she had long kept hidden for fear of persecution. The Queen listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, making observations that revealed a mind sharper than her courtly demeanor might suggest. Lady Catherine, freed from her role as silent observer, proved to be surprisingly well-read in natural philosophy and contributed insights that sparked new lines of discussion. And through it all, Lord Marcus remained at Amara's side, his presence warm and steady, his dark eyes finding hers with increasing frequency as the afternoon wore on. When the gathering finally concluded and the Queen prepared to depart, she took Amara's hands in her own. "You have given me hope today, Miss Osi," she said quietly. "Hope that this kingdom can grow beyond its fears and prejudices. Hope that knowledge can triumph over ignorance. I look forward to watching what you build." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Amara replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "For everything." The Queen nodded, then turned to Lord Marcus with an expression that carried layers of meaning Amara could not quite decipher. "Take care of her, Marcus, and let her take care of you. Heaven knows you both deserve someone who understands." She departed with Lady Catherine in attendance, leaving Amara and Lord Marcus alone in the rose silk room where so much had changed. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Beyond the windows, the winter sun was setting, painting the snow-covered gardens in shades of gold and rose. Well, Lord Marcus said finally, a hint of amusement in his voice. That was not how I expected this afternoon to proceed. Nor I. Amara found herself smiling despite the emotional exhaustion that was beginning to settle into her bones. I came here expecting to fight for my life. Instead, I seem to have acquired a school, royal patronage, and... She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. And? He prompted gently. She met his eyes, saw the hope and vulnerability that he was no longer trying to hide. And something I never expected to find, she finished softly. Not here, not in this kingdom, not with someone like you. He stepped closer, and she felt the warmth of his presence like sunlight after a long winter. Someone like me? A nobleman, a lord, the brother of my enemy. She paused, then added, a man who sees me, truly sees me, in a way no one has since I left my homeland. He reached out and took her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers. I meant what I said, Amara. Every word. I know it is too soon by the standards of courtship. I know there will be obstacles, prejudices to overcome, scandals to weather, my sister's enmity to endure. But I also know that what I feel for you is real and true and stronger than any obstacle that might stand against it. You barely know me, she whispered, though her heart was racing and her hands had tightened on his without her conscious decision. I know enough. His dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I know your courage, your wisdom, your compassion. I know that you crossed an ocean alone and built a life through nothing but your own determination. I know that you faced my sister's malice without flinching, that you spoke truth in a room full of people who could have destroyed you with a word. I know that looking at you makes me feel as though I have finally found the place I was always meant to be. A tear slipped down Amara's cheek, and she was surprised to find that it was not a tear of sorrow. My lord. Marcus, he corrected gently. Please, just Marcus. Marcus. The name felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. I cannot make you any promises. My path has always been uncertain, my future unclear. I do not know what obstacles await us, what prejudices we will face, what... Then we will face them together, he said simply. Whatever comes, whatever challenges arise, we will face them as partners, as allies, as... He paused, and a small, almost shy smile crossed his features. As whatever else we might become in time. She looked at this man, this unexpected gift who had walked into her cottage offering protection and stayed to offer something far more precious, and felt the walls she had built around her heart begin, at last, to crumble. Together, she repeated, testing the word. Together, he confirmed. And then, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a promise rather than a demand. And when Amara found herself responding, found her hands rising to cup his face, found her heart opening in a way she had thought it never would again, she understood that this was not an ending. It was a beginning. 6 months passed, and the world transformed. Spring came to Valdoria in a rush of green and gold, the harsh winter retreating before an onslaught of warming breezes and budding flowers. In Ashford village, the fields awakened from their frozen sleep, and farmers returned to the rhythms of planting and tending that had shaped their lives for generations. But the greatest transformation was taking place at Ashford Manor, where Lord Marcus's vision was becoming reality. The west wing of the manor house had been converted into the kingdom's first school of healing arts. Its halls now echoed with the voices of 23 students, women from villages throughout Valdoria who had shown aptitude for the healing craft but had never before had access to formal training. They learned the properties of herbs and the preparation of medicines. They studied anatomy from texts that Lord Marcus had brought back from his travels. They practiced techniques of wound care and fever management that would save countless lives in the years to come. And at the center of it all was Amara. She stood now in the great hall of the manor, watching as her students demonstrated their knowledge for a distinguished audience. Queen Eleonora had come from the capital for the occasion, accompanied by Lady Catherine and several other nobles who had expressed interest in supporting the school. The students were nervous, Amara could tell, but they were also prepared, and as each one presented her work, she saw confidence growing in their faces. Lord Marcus appeared at her side, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity of long companionship. "You've done something remarkable here," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "We've done it together," she corrected. "None of this would exist without your support, your resources, your knowledge," he interrupted. "Your courage, your refusal to let fear dictate your choices." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I provided the building, Amara. You provided everything that matters." She looked up at him. This man who had become her partner in every sense of the word over these past months, and felt her heart swell with an emotion she had finally learned to name: love. It had grown slowly between them, nurtured by long conversations in his library, by shared meals and quiet walks through the awakening gardens, by the countless small moments of understanding and support that had accumulated into something unshakable. They had faced obstacles, as he had warned they would. There were nobles who refused to acknowledge her, servants who struggled with the idea of a black woman as their future lady, whispers that followed her wherever she went. But there were also victories. The Queen's public endorsement had silenced many critics. The success of the school had won over skeptics who cared more about results than prejudice. And Marcus himself had proven, time and again, that his commitment was unwavering, that no social pressure or family obligation could shake his determination to build a life with her. They had not yet married, though the proposal had been made and accepted in a quiet moment 3 months past. Amara had asked for time to establish the school, time to prove herself on her own terms before becoming the Lady of Ashford. Marcus had agreed without hesitation, understanding that her need for independence was not a rejection of him, but an expression of who she was. "The Queen wishes to speak with you after the demonstrations," Marcus said now. "She has news, apparently. Something about expanding the school's charter." "Expanding?" "She's been impressed by the results. Several villages in the eastern provinces have requested graduates to serve as their healers." He smiled, that small, warm smile she had come to love. "It seems your influence is spreading faster than even you anticipated." Before Amara could respond, a commotion at the hall's entrance drew their attention. A messenger in royal livery was speaking urgently to one of the servants, his face flushed from hard riding. The servant approached the Queen, whispered something in her ear. Eleanora's expression shifted, her gray eyes widening slightly before she rose from her chair. "My lords and ladies, I apologize for the interruption, but I have just received news that requires immediate attention." She turned to Amara, and there was something complicated in her gaze. Concern, perhaps, but also what looked almost like satisfaction. "Miss O.C., Lord Marcus, please join me in the private study. There is something you must hear." They followed the Queen through the manor's corridors to the small room Marcus used for estate business. The messenger waited there, still breathing hard from his journey. "Speak," the Queen commanded. "Your Majesty, my lord, my lady." The messenger bowed hastily. "I bring word from the western provinces. The Duchess of Thornbury—" He swallowed. "The Duchess has been arrested." Amara felt Marcus stiffen beside her. "Arrested? On what charge?" "Conspiracy, my lord, against the crown." The messenger's voice dropped. "It seems the Duchess was involved in a plot to undermine Her Majesty's authority. Letters were discovered, communications with foreign agents, plans to—" He trailed off, glancing at the Queen. "To replace me with a more pliable monarch," Eleanora finished flatly. "My cousin's ambition, it seems, knew no bounds." Silence fell over the room. Amara thought of the golden-haired woman who had sought to destroy her, whose cruelty had been so absolute and so casual. She searched within herself for satisfaction at this news, for triumph, for vindication. She found only sadness. "What will happen to her?" she asked quietly. "She will face trial," the Queen replied. "The evidence is irrefutable. Her lands will be forfeit to the crown, her titles stripped. She paused. The penalty for treason is death. Marcus made a sound low in his throat, and Amara felt him struggling with emotions too complex to name. Whatever the Duchess had become, she was still his sister. The same blood ran in their veins, the same parents had raised them. "Your Majesty," Amara heard herself say, "might I speak with you privately?" The Queen raised an eyebrow but nodded, gesturing for Marcus and the messenger to step outside. When they were alone, Eleonora studied Amara with those sharp gray eyes that seemed to see everything. "You wish to plead for her life?" the Queen said. It was not a question. "I wish—" Amara paused, gathering her thoughts. "I wish to ask whether justice might be served without taking a life. The Duchess tried to destroy me, Your Majesty. She would have seen me burned as a witch if her plans had succeeded. I have no love for her, but I have seen too much death in my life to wish it on anyone, even an enemy. She conspired against the crown. Yes, and she should be punished, stripped of her titles, her wealth, her power, everything that she used to cause harm, but—" Amara met the Queen's gaze directly. "My mother taught me that the measure of a person is not how they treat those who can benefit them, but how they treat those who cannot. The Duchess has no power now. She can no longer harm anyone. To kill her would be revenge, not justice." The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a small smile crossed her features. "You are a remarkable woman, Amara Osei. You stand here pleading for mercy for the woman who would have destroyed you. Most would be calling for her head. I am not most people, Your Majesty." "No." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "No, you are not." She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the latch. "I will consider your words. I make no promises, but I will consider them. That is all I ask." Epilogue. A New Dawn. 1 year later, on a morning when summer lay golden across the hills of Ashford, Amara stood at the window of the chamber she now shared with her husband and watched the sun rise over the lands that had become her home. So much had changed since that winter day when a summons had arrived at her cottage door. The school had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with 3 satellite locations now operating in distant provinces. Nearly 100 healers had been trained under her guidance, carrying knowledge that would save thousands of lives in the years to come. The Queen had become not just a patron, but a friend, visiting regularly to observe the school's progress and to discuss ideas for further reforms. The Duchess of Thornbury had not been executed. The Queen had commuted her sentence to permanent exile in a remote convent, stripped of title and lands and influence. It was a mercy that some considered too lenient, but Amara had seen wisdom in it. The Duchess would live out her days in obscurity, contemplating the ruins of her ambitions, a fate that, for a woman so consumed by pride, was perhaps worse than death. And there was this. The warmth of Marcus's arm around her shoulders as he joined her at the window, the solid certainty of his love, the knowledge that she had found against all odds a place where she belonged. "You're thinking again," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm remembering," she corrected. "This time last year I was a foreign healer living in a cottage, expecting nothing from life but survival. And now you're the Lady of Ashford, founder of the kingdom's first school of healing arts, advisor to the Queen, and wife to a man who still cannot quite believe his luck." Marcus turned her to face him, his dark eyes soft with emotion. "I know I tell you this every day, Amara, but I want you to hear it again. You have changed everything. My life, my home, this kingdom. You have changed it all, simply by being who you are." She reached up to touch his face, marveling still at the gift of him. "We changed it together," she said. "Everything that matters we did together." He smiled, that small, warm smile she had come to love more than anything in the world. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." The sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the hills and forests of Ashford, across the manor where students were beginning to stir, across the village where life went on in its eternal rhythms. And in the window of the great house, Two people stood in each other's arms, watching a new day begin. Not the end of a story, but the beginning of one. One that would continue for all the days of their lives. If you watched until the end, it's because this story touched something real inside you. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until the end, so I can know who you are." The ones who truly appreciate these stories of courage, love, and human dignity. If this story moved you, please like and share it with someone who needs to hear that the measure of a person is not in their birth, but in their heart. And that love, true love, finds us when we finally have the courage to be seen. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story. Until next time, may you find the strength to stand tall, no matter who is watching.